Every generation has its leaders and teachers. They are the motivators, the manipulators, who change a defeat into victory. They are the dreamers and the planners of battles that divide brothers into rivals. They are the molders and shapers of destinies, turning boys into men. And they are bound together by one belief, a desire to create winners.
Bear Bryant was a savage guy. He was hard. I mean, at Maryland, he took the quarterback's hand, which was broken, and slammed it up against a wall to get it straightened out so he could play the second half.
I literally would walk across the street instead of meeting him on the sidewalk on that side of the street. I felt like he was more than just the coach or more than just a man.
At the age of 40, Bryant came to Texas A&M as the new coach of the Aggies. He was anxious to create a winner on his own terms after being forced from the spotlight at Maryland and Kentucky.
Bear Bryant arrived at Texas A&M February 8th, 1954, in a very bad mood. He had just left Kentucky, where things had not gone as he had hoped. He gets to A&M, he's got one of the worst football teams you've ever seen.
The Aggies had lost 11 games in their previous 2 seasons. To stir some support for the team, Bryant boasted to hundreds of students at a pep rally that we will win again. We must win again. Now, after months of planning, he decided to hold a summer training camp in Junction, Texas, almost 300 miles from the A&M campus.
He didn't know that Junction was in the kind of shape that it was in. I mean, it was a dust bowl, it was rattlesnakes, it was nothing but rocks and sand spurs, and when they got there, when they pulled through the gate, he almost got sick.
Paul Bear Bryant was born in Morrow Bottom, Arkansas on September 11th, 1913, while American women still marched for the right to vote. At 11 years old, after his father was disabled, he helped his mother sell vegetables from a horse-drawn carriage. Often ridiculed by other children for being so poor, Bryant was willing to wrestle even a carnival bear for money.
Bear got up on stage, and the muzzle came off the bear's nose and bit Bear on the side of the neck. And he starts bleeding, and he's trying to get away from the bear, and he jumps off the stage, almost breaks both of his legs, and takes off running. Well, he didn't get the dollar, but he got the nickname.
On August 31st, 1954, Bryant and 113 players on 2 buses rolled through the wooden gates of the Junction compound. Bryant had chosen the location to be as far as possible from the prying eyes of the alumni and press who might interfere with his way of running things. Its purpose, he said, was to find out right off who the players were and who the quitters were.
Sounded like we're going to go to a camp and have a good time. And everything's going real well until about 4:30 the next morning when the whistle started blowing, we started getting up to hit the practice field by daylight.
There was a mountain right behind the cabin, or Quonset hut, where Bear Bryant stayed. And as soon as that sun popped over that ridge of that mountain, side straddle hops. Here we go, practice started. 4 hours in the morning without breakfast. And then 4.5 hours in the afternoon until the sun goes down. I mean, he worked him like nobody ever worked anybody.
Even as the temperatures rose into the hundreds, Bryant had the team practice scrimmages, punt returns, and blocking in full gear. One of his most extreme tactics was not to allow players to drink water.
When you're on the field about 4 hours and it's over 100 degrees and you don't get a drink of water, you start having heat prostration, heat strokes, or whatever, just from lack of fluids. The thing of the day we looked forward to was getting in the showers after the workout, and most guys would even go in with their pads on just to try to cool down and get a drink of water. Coach Bryant was just lucky he didn't kill everyone.
Players that were injured were told to ignore their pain and play or pack up and leave. By the end of the third day, a dozen players had quit.
They left in the middle of the night, and they would either hitchhike or they would walk the 2 miles down to the bus station. A guy named Rob Roy Spiller, he was 18 years old, in fact, on his way to Texas A&M, ran the bus station. And he'd say, "Where do you boys want to go this morning?" And they'd say, "We don't care, first bus out."
On the sixth day, Billy Schroeder, a 200-pound tackle, was so overcome by the lack of water he simply collapsed on the field. In order to save his life, the local doctor packed his body in ice to allow it to cool.
I don't think I've really had too many thoughts about quitting. It was tough, but it really never crossed my mind that to quit or leave. My parents wouldn't let me come home, so you better stick it out.
Halfback Billy Pete Huddleston, in his daily letter to his fiancée, never complained about the heat or the marathon days, only the lack of players. We're in deep trouble now. I have been able to count heads, but I'd bet we're down to about 40 boys. Finally, on September 9th, 10 days after it began, Bryant called it quits, telling a group of reporters, "Boys, it's been heaven on earth out here. We've been able to separate the quitters from the keepers, the turds from the champions."
They went with 113 players and went on 2 buses. They came back to College Station on 1 bus, half full, about 30 players, and really and truly 23 who were ready to start the season.
That year, after all of Bryant's work and all of the players' sacrifices, the Aggies only won 1 game. In his nearly 4 decades as a coach, that was to be Bryant's only losing season. Even after he had moved on to his extraordinary years in Alabama, those 4 years at Texas were never forgotten.
When Bear died, he had 2 rings on. One was his wedding ring, and the other was a 25-year commemorative ring that he had gotten from the team that went to Junction, his first team.
Now, remember this, you can't get any more out of this game than you put into it. I want you to play football because you like it. If there's any fella here who doesn't like football, I want him to turn in his suit and get away because he's wasting his time.
The most important figure of the 20th century in college football was Knute Rockne. He won national titles, and he made people who had no interest in college football care about college football.
The biggest thing about Knute Rockne is that he's the embodiment of the melting pot ideal. He was a high school dropout, and he went to Notre Dame, a Catholic school, because he heard that there was a better chance to get jobs on that campus, even for a Lutheran.
N-O-T-R-E-G-A-M-E, Notre Dame, Notre Dame, Notre Dame.
Upon entering Notre Dame in 1910, the Norwegian-born Knut Kenneth Rockne was a balding 22-year-old. Despite his boxer-like appearance, Rockne edited the school newspaper, mastered the flute, earned a degree in chemistry, and played on the football team. After assisting Coach Jesse Harper for 4 years, Rockne was named head football coach in 1918. At a time when reporters and editors were eager to fill their newspapers with stories of heroes, Rockne was more than happy to supply them with the legends.
The greatest day in the history of college football is probably October 18th, 1924. You had the Four Horsemen were born in New York by the way of Grantland Rice.
During a game between Notre Dame and Army at the Polo Grounds in 1924, Grantland Rice, a reporter for the New York Tribune, wrote, "Outlined against the blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again. In dramatic lore, they are known as famine, pestilence, destruction, and death. These are only aliases. Their real names are Stuhldrayer, Miller, Crowley, and Layton."
The actual idea for the Four Horsemen lead came from a student named George Strickler. He had seen the film, the Rudolph Valentino film of the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse.
At halftime, Strickler told Rice that he thought Notre Dame's backfield reminded him of the Four Horsemen in the way they charged out of the dust to defeat their opponents.
So Rice, like most reporters, shamelessly would steal anything at hand because he's got a deadline, he's got to get it out. And he types out, outlined against a blue-gray October sky, the Four Horsemen rode again.
As 55,000 fans watched Notre Dame defeat Army 13-7, George Strickler had one more idea: a photo of the Four Horsemen.
So it's a sort of wonderful conjunction of gee-whiz journalism, George Strickler having the right idea, Grantland Rice stealing it and being able to write the lead, and the public just embracing it.
When asked about the origin of the Four Horsemen, Rockne modestly stated, "How that came about is one of the most inscrutable achievements of coincidence, of which I know nothing save that it's rather a satisfying mouthful of words." Rockne always found a way to motivate his players. On November 10th, 1928, after a scoreless first half against Army, Rockne called the team together and told them about George Gipp.
4-7 by Abraham Lincoln, obviously, is the most famous and the greatest speech in the history of this country. But the second most famous was given on that Saturday in New York when he said, "Let's win one for the Gipper." I mean, everybody knows what win one for the Gipper means.
Gipp was an outstanding athlete who single-handedly led Notre Dame over Army in 1920. He was also known to drink and gamble a little too much. Tragically, Gipp died a few weeks after the game and reportedly told Rockne on his deathbed that when things are wrong and the brakes are beating the boys, tell them to go in there with all they've got and win one, just one, for the Gipper.
At halftime of that game against Army, Rockne mentions Gipp. He doesn't do the famous speech because that had not been written yet. That was written 2 years later by his ghostwriter. But he talks about Gipp and how about winning this game.
We're going inside them. We're going outside them. Inside them, outside them. And when we get them on the run once, we're going to keep them on the run.
Now, the people who knew Gipp said the deathbed speech I imagine Gipp would give would be, "Hey, Rock, when you got a sure thing, put a couple hundred down for me," because that was the real George Gipp.
Real or imagined, spoken or unspoken, the words Rockne delivered to his players had one effect. It made them win, and they kept on winning. By 1930, his team had won 105 games and lost 12.
If you believe in reincarnation, Thomas Jefferson came back as Knute Rockne. Take the stadium. When he built the stadium, he left a lot of land around the stadium, and the good fathers at Notre Dame looked at this land and said, "Knute, what is this for?" He said, "We're building this new stadium. We want to have space for parking." And the good fathers at Notre Dame said, "Knute, nobody drives." And Knute Rockne said, "They will, fathers, they will."
His reputation and fame had grown so large that on March 31st, 1931, he was on his way to Hollywood to make a movie about his life. But in an ironic twist of fate, he was killed in a plane crash 2 miles from the Kansas farm of his mentor, Jesse Harper. On a clear fall day in 1956, the Oklahoma Sooners trailed the Colorado Buffaloes by 13 points at halftime. With a 35-game winning streak on the line, Coach Bud Wilkinson needed to prompt his team into action.
And he's totally out of character. He says, "Take those jerseys off. Those jerseys mean tradition to the University of Oklahoma. Take them off." Well, they took them off. And he says, "Men, there's only one person in this stadium who believes you're going to win today. That person is me." Well, Billy Pricer, who's one of the toughest guys who ever lived, turns, and instead of opening the door, he starts ramming it. He knocks it off the runway, and here go the players running through this hole on their way out to the field without their jerseys. The coaches are having to yell, "Put your jerseys back on."
Final score, Oklahoma 27, Colorado 19. For all his players, Wilkinson's familiar motto rang true that day. If you are going to be a champion, you must be willing to pay a greater price than your opponent will ever pay. At the end of World War II, Oklahoma coach Jim Tatum persuaded Wilkinson to join his staff. Within a year, Tatum departed, and 31-year-old Wilkinson was the new coach.
The Grapes of Wrath image followed the state of Oklahoma into World War II, and after the war, they were looking for something to put Oklahoma people feeling good about themselves. And Wilkinson presented everything that perhaps the Oklahoma image was not. He was articulate, coat and tie image. He was a very handsome, tall, impressive-looking man. He made us feel that there was something worthwhile in the state.
Bud Wilkinson was so different from everyone else in his era in that he was a brain guy as opposed to a fist guy. It was more ballet than it really was hardcore football or wrestling. What he was doing was ballet in motion.
Down in the Sooner locker room, Wilkinson hung huge red and white signs to remind every player before they stepped onto the field to play like a champion.
He had these steely blue eyes and this wonderful smile, toothy smile. You couldn't help but listen to every word he said. And of course, then you'd go out and just play your heart out for this man.
If we ran a play and you didn't run it quite right, he'd call you back, and then he'd put his arm around you, and he'd say, "Watch this guy, watch him run this." And he's telling you what to do and how to do it, and boy, that just pumped the old adrenaline, and you're ready to go.
Beginning on October 10th, 1953, Wilkinson led his Sooners on a winning rampage. After beating Texas 19-14 in their third game of the season, Oklahoma was unbeatable for the next 4 years. One reporter compared their winning streak to the dominance of the Imperial German Army and Standard Oil. After winning 47 straight games, Wilkinson and his team faced Notre Dame, who they had humbled 40-0 the previous season.
Here's the play of the game, and Sooner fans are shocked. Dick Lynch behind Pietrasanti's bone-crushing block sweeps into the end zone for a touchdown. Notre Dame snaps Oklahoma's 47-game winning streak and hands the Sooners their first shutout in 124 consecutive games.
You could see all the people crying and sobbing, and, you know, the world had come to an end. Bud went over, shook the coach's hand, and just walked off. I mean, there's nothing. I mean, he walked off. I'm quite sure he felt it, but you'd never know that. And he said, hey, that game is over. Let's get ready to play the next week. That's the kind of person that he was.
Under Wilkinson, Oklahoma would end the decade having lost only 10 games. His only major defeat would occur outside the gridiron, when in 1964, he lost his bid for the United States Senate seat. Wilkinson's philosophy in life was simple. A man who tried his best and failed is superior to the man who never tried. In 1890, Amos Alonzo Stagg faced the toughest decision of his young life. He was torn between a vocation as a minister or a career as a football coach. Already an All-American on Yale's football team, Stagg had just completed a year's study at Yale Divinity School.
And he would go out and make speeches during the spring and summer. And he was horrible, absolutely horrible. So he agonized, anguished all summer long. All of this has been for nothing. And the thought came in that he could serve his master. He could be a minister by being a football coach.
Amos Alonzo Stagg was born on August 16, 1862, in West Orange, New Jersey, 14 days before the Second Battle of Bull Run. The fifth of 8 children, he was a gifted athlete who turned down several offers to pitch professional baseball.
Stagg to American college football was Washington to American politics. I mean, much of what we know now to be the heart and guts of the game, somehow you could trace back to Amos Alonzo Stagg. I mean, the huddle, for example, the T formation, things like that. He was constantly inventing.
In 1892, Stagg was appointed as the first director of physical culture and athletics at the University of Chicago. On the 1st of October, Stagg sent out his call for football players. 13 students showed up, forcing him to name himself captain of the team.
Chicago was virgin territory. No one had really shown Chicagoans what this game of football was about. In fact, during the time that he took that gridiron message west, the newspapers very openly and literally called him the football missionary, and the gospel of the gridiron comes to Chicago.
Football was still ruled by the belief that the team that was the biggest and the strongest would win. A mass play placed the man with the ball in the center of a wedge that ran down the field, knocking down opposing players like tin pins.
So linemen would literally box with each other. It was like 7 tough man contests going on with each snap of the ball. And what Stagg believed would take care of this was by allowing the ball to be thrown forward.
He perfected the man in motion, developed a backfield shift, and created over 64 pass plays. After 2 successful seasons, Stagg wanted to put his team on the national map. Scheduling games against the powerhouses of Harvard, Yale, and Princeton did little to further his school's reputation.
Stagg goes to his boss, President Harper, and said, "I've got this idea. I'd like to take my boys on a train trip, not east, 800 miles east, but 2,200 miles west and down the coast of California. My old mentor, Camp, is now the coach at Stanford, and we'd like to play some football."
On a sunny Christmas afternoon, Stagg's Maroons beat Stanford 24-4. Camp demanded a rematch a few days later, and the 2 teams met again in Los Angeles.
Chicago and Stanford play a game of football at the New Year in the sunshine of Southern California, far from either campus, for no ostensible educational reason, only for the gate receipts and the publicity. So the Rose Bowl really should give obeisance to Stagg for inventing that idea almost 10 years before the Rose Bowl itself says it was founded.
Stagg demanded unwavering discipline. His players were required to sign a contract forcing them to abstain from drinking, smoking, and gambling. He even had special chimes installed in the clock tower to alert them of their 11 o'clock curfew.
Imagine a 40-year-old man being referred to on a campus as the old man.
By 1913, the Maroons had won their 5th Big Ten championship, and Stagg continued to innovate, developing numbered uniforms, varsity letters, and even knit pants for his players. Football teams across the country learned the game from the gospel of Stagg. He was proclaimed the Dean of Western football. Even as Stagg's approach to the game was spreading throughout the country, he was forced to retire from Chicago in 1932, the victim of the school's de-emphasis of the game. A few months later, he became the coach at the University of Pacific and continued coaching until he was 90 years old.
When he was living out his days in Stockton, he would cut his grass with a hand mower. And then kids would come in the afternoon and tear it up playing football. Finally, a neighbor leaned over the fence one day and said, "Mr. Stagg, I don't understand this." He said, "I see you out here working so hard on your grass, and then you let these kids come in and mess it up every day." And Stagg said, "Sir," he says, "I'm not raising grass, I'm raising boys."
He raises millions and millions of dollars and lives in the same home. Has his phone number listed. I mean, he is not a football coach. I mean, he could be a governor, he'd be run for president.
There have been programs that have come and gone and had flash and glitter and won some games. But his program has remained consistent throughout that, and he has remained consistent to his principles and the ideals of college football.
I've never really just wanted to be a coach. And when I told my dad that I was going to do everything I could to become the best coach I could become and hopefully have a good career, and he said, "But whatever you do, don't leave any place without having made an impact on it."
Joseph Paterno was born in Brooklyn, New York on December 21st, 1926. The son of a New York Supreme Court clerk, he graduated from Brown University in 1950 with all intentions of becoming a lawyer. But his plans were quickly altered when Coach Rip Engel asked him to become his assistant at Penn State.
I was a pain in the backside when I first came. I had all the answers, even though I didn't know a darn thing about coaching.
In 1966, after working as an assistant for 15 years, Paterno took over as head coach. Immediately, he wanted to redefine the importance of academics in the lives of his athletes. He called it his grand experiment.
My idea was, hey, we were going to go without that stereotype jock, the animal house. No, that was not going to be the way. We were going to play, and we were going to knock people down, and we were going to pick them up, and we were going to have some class, and we were going to go to class, and we were going to graduate.
I think why Joe can stay in the game where others probably couldn't is because he's in the game for different reasons. He likes to win football games, but he's an educator first. And I think because of that, he never loses.
Put him out if you want.
Most people will tell you, even the guys that had a difficult time with Joe in their simple 4 years at Penn State, look back and say, you know, the lessons that I was told, I tell my kids now.
In 1979, after winning 22 games and losing just one in 2 seasons, Paterno faced Bear Bryant and Alabama in the Sugar Bowl. It would turn out to be one of Paterno's most trying moments.
Humphreys had a pretty good day punting, had one bad one for 9 yards. Oh, it's out his back to it. And he gets another ball out of there.
And they shanked the punt. Shanked it out of bounds inside their 30-yard line. And we still had a minute something to go in the ball game.
The flag thrown way back upfield by the back judge. Would you believe there are 12 men on the field? Who? By Penn State. Oh, hello. And that is 15 yards.
So we played with 12 guys, which gave him a 15-yard penalty first down. We have no more timeouts left.
Joe is going to be turned aside one more time. As he hunts elusive number 1. That's your last play of the ball game. It is over. Alabama has defeated Penn State.
They run out the clock. So I felt I really let the football team down.
3 years later, Paterno's grand experiment was complete.
Lions have got a drive going here, a time-consuming effort, too. But now Blackledge is going to put it up on first down. He's going for the bundle. Garrity! Touchdown!
Penn State beat Georgia 27-23 in the Sugar Bowl. They were the undisputed national champions.
It was great for the state of Pennsylvania. It was great for Penn State. But I really, you know, it was one of those things that you wanted to see happen. When it happened, and, you know, like eating an ice cream cone, you know, you look forward to it. When it's gone, it's gone.
Paterno has coached at Penn State for over 35 years and has won over 300 games. His teams have had 7 undefeated seasons, and they have won 2 national championships. But he is most proud of the students who have graduated through his program.
He was asked in 1973, when he had one of his undefeated teams, if this was his best team. And his answer was, we'll know how successful this team has been in about 25 years, because then we'll find out what kind of people they turned out to be. They had a reunion in 1998, and a friend of Paterno's brought that up to him, and Paterno smiled and said, yeah, looked around the room and said, I guess we can call this a successful group.
In 1903, the Carlisle Indian School faced off against a Harvard team that had shut out 6 of their previous 8 opponents. Carlisle was a government school whose mission was to school Indians in American ways. With the game scoreless after the first half, Carlisle coach Glenn Warner called for the hidden ball play.
Harvard was always a big nemesis of his because he always felt like they were the establishment. And he always wanted to be able to prove to his players that they could keep up with and compete against that. So he would always try to level the playing field a little bit by coming up with something sneaky.
At the 5-yard line, the Carlisle players gathered around an individual called the Hunchback. Warner had secretly sewn elastic into the Hunchback's jersey, allowing the ball to be placed in his shirt. As the quarterback yelled, "Go!" The entire team headed for the goal line, each hugging his helmet to his chest.
The guys coming the other way had no idea, because nobody could see a football. The hunchback player at that time went straight up the field. He was untouched, and it really shocked the Harvard people.
Late in the half, Harvard scored 2 touchdowns to win 12-11, but the damage had been done. Tiny Carlisle had fooled one of the nation's greatest teams. A few seasons later, Warner's hidden ball play was permanently outlawed. Glenn Scobie Warner was born in Springville, New York on April 5th, 1871, less than 2 years after the first college football game. Even though he pitched semi-pro baseball as a teenager, a future in athletics did not seem to be in the making. By the age of 22, he was broke, having gambled away all his savings betting on horses.
He wired his dad and said, "Dad, I decided to go to law school at Cornell." And while on the train going to Cornell, he happened to meet the gentleman that was going to be coaching the football team. The guy asked him to come out for football when he got there, which he did, and made the team the first day.
Nicknamed Pop by his fellow students because of his advanced age, Warner would nonetheless excel in football, track, and boxing. After graduating and finding little success as a lawyer, Warner returned to athletics. He coached football at Iowa, Georgia, and finally settled at Carlisle in 1899. Although physically lacking, Warner found players with a tremendous spirit and a desire to test the conventions of the game. His attention immediately focused on Jim Thorpe, a Sac and Fox Indian with a gift for speed. With Thorpe as his lead man, Warner created plays that relied on sleight of hand to beat his opponents.
Thorpe was outstanding. There was nobody as good as him. He was a powerful runner, a great kicker. He could pass the football when he had to. You brought him together with Pop Warner, who was one of the great innovators of the game. You brought them together, and Carlisle suddenly had a football team that was really good.
One writer noting Carlisle's new prominence stated, "The Indians are no longer considered as mere practice for the Big 11." After the closing of Carlisle, Warner returned to his vagabond ways. He brought 2 national championships to Pittsburgh, 1 national championship and 3 Rose Bowl appearances to Stanford. And finally for Temple, an appearance in the first Sugar Bowl in 1935. In his 44-year coaching career, Warner would win a total of 319 games, a record for most victories that would stand until Paul Bear Bryant broke it in 1982.
Pop Warner was always able to create new plays, which always kept the defensive people off balance. And I think that pretty much sums up Pop Warner's entire life, always trying to find an advantage over the guy he was competing against.
On a stormy winter evening in 1934, 12 top coaches were invited to speak to a youth football league in Philadelphia. As travel conditions worsened, every coach except one canceled. 30 minutes late, and a cane in his hand, 63-year-old Pop Warner walked on stage. For the next few hours, he dazzled the audience with stories and insights into the game. To honor Warner's support for their fledgling organization, they renamed it the Pop Warner Football Conference. Today, there are Pop Warner leagues in over 35 states and 2 foreign countries.
Grambling got the reputation as the Notre Dame of black college football, and in large part it was due to Eddie Robinson.
He says, "I try to get a piece of every boy that plays for me, and I try to give him a piece of me if it's worth anything."
Not that we didn't have fathers at home, but he understood that you was at Grambling. It was his responsibility to steer you in the right direction.
Edward Gay Robinson was born on February the 13th, 1919, in Jackson, Louisiana, 1 month before the start of Prohibition. The son of a third-generation sharecropper, Robinson found his inspiration to become a coach in the 4th grade.
When the local high school coach brought his team over one day, and he watched how he handled his players and how he talked with the kids, and he liked that. And he said he knew from that point that he wanted to be a coach.
Coaching is the most rewarding profession in the world, and no man is too good to coach the American youth.
In 1941, Robinson was a 22-year-old college graduate working in a feed mill in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. The former star quarterback was looking for a new job when the Louisiana Negro Normal and Industrial Institute announced they needed a new football coach. For $64 a month, Robinson mowed and lined the field, sewed torn uniforms, directed the band, and wrote stories for the local papers. His first team only won 3 games, but by the next season, the Tigers were 8-0 and unscored on.
He took a special interest in the young men. He went to the dormitories with his bell, and he woke them up and made sure they ate, and then they went to class. And he would say, meet one on the street, and he'd say, well, you're supposed to be in class right now. Well, Coach, I couldn't make, oh, no, you have to go to class.
You're gonna have to block him. We practice each day. You got to block him, and you got to stay with him. You can't block him and turn around.
Never heard the man curse in my life. I was there 5 years with a red shirt year. I never heard him say nothing but damn it.
This is what you've been waiting for. This is the opportunity you need to knock this team off. I hope you read the papers this morning. Did nobody pick you?
Coach Robinson's halftime speech would consist of him going on and on about how, oh, you don't love Grambling, you don't love Grambling, you're not playing hard. And he would start crying. I mean, he would, he'd have tears streaming down his face about how you don't love Grambling.
For the next 3 decades, through the civil rights marches, the Vietnam War, and the collapse of the Berlin Wall, Eddie Robinson coached at Grambling.
Grambling took its product outside of the South. They played in Chicago, they played in New York, they played in Los Angeles, they played in Houston. They took their program around the country and exposed it to everybody.
By October 5th, 1985, he had won 323 games, tying a record set by Bear Bryant for the most wins.
The fact that Eddie Robinson broke such a revered record by such a revered coach gave a lot of credibility, I think, not only to Coach Robinson and his career, but to black college football and the types of players that it turned out.
When asked what he thought about breaking Bryant's record, Robinson replied, I've never thought about the records. I've just thought about the kids. When they come out of Grambling, they have my signature on them. They aren't the English teacher's kids or the math teacher's kids. They are Eddie's boys, and I'll try to make them better than average.
He says, I really don't think you can be a good coach unless you love them. And he really believes that, and it's reflected. Heck, he has over 200 guys that played in the NFL, and more important than that, he has doctors and lawyers and teachers, people that have been tremendous successes in the world.
In 1997, after coaching 588 games and winning 408, Robinson retired from football.
Florida State had lost, I think, 22 games in a row. They were a laughingstock. That's where Florida State was when Bobby Bowden took over in 1976.
On Monday, January the 12th, Robert Klecker Bowden was named Florida State University's 8th head coach in its 28-year history. Bobby Bowden described his relationship to Florida State as a marriage, determined to let no man put it asunder.
So when the opportunity came to go to Florida State, it's not like I jumped on it, because I nearly turned it down 2 or 3 times. We kind of, Ann and I at the last moment said, let's go to Florida State.
He beat 5 teams in his first year and lost to 6. It would be his only losing season with the Seminoles. As the rebuilding process commenced, Bowden began with a pilgrimage.
Bobby Bowden took Florida State and went on the road. He went to Lincoln and he beat Nebraska. He went to Notre Dame and he beat Notre Dame. He went wherever he could get a game with somebody and beat them.
Midway through the 1981 season, Florida State began a road trip on September 19th and ended 5 weeks later at Nebraska, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Pittsburgh, and finally Louisiana State. The wary Seminoles won 3 of those games.
He went anywhere and he'd play anybody. And he wasn't scared of that. He understood that's what he had to do to get attention, and he understood that he was good enough or could make his team good enough that they could play on equal terms with those guys.
By the mid-'80s, Bowden's persistence and risk-taking resulted in wins. The combination of size and speed gave the Seminoles the firepower to fuel their high-octane attack.
Philosophically, as a coach, what kind of football does he believe in? Score, score, score. Bobby Bowden is offensive football.
He's such an innovative coach. I mean, he wins games sometimes with sheer audacity. He'll come out and do things, quick kicks and 4th down passes and end arounds and tackle eligibles and all those things that innovative coaches have thought up over the years. Bobby Bowden flat out does.
By the end of the 80s, Florida State was no longer a contender. They were a powerhouse.
And then beginning in 1987, they embarked on a 14-year run that we've never seen before. To be in the top 4 for that amount of time every single year is astounding.
But Bowden's legacy transcends Florida State. The X's and O's are in his blood, literally. 2 of his sons, Tommy and Terry, have become college football head coaches of their own.
Tommy and I, pretty much 13 or 14, we both felt like we were going to be coaches. We saw a very, very positive side of coaching, and maybe that's why we all wanted to go into it.
Tommy is the only one that kind of hinted early in his, even high school, that he wanted to be a coach, you know. Terry got a law degree. I thought sure he was going into law. But opportunities came and they couldn't turn it down. They wanted to coach.
On October 23rd, 1999, Florida State traveled north to face conference rival Clemson. But it was more than a conference game. It was the first time father would play son in college football history.
People talked about being a backyard brawl or a family feud. Hey, there was no love lost on that one, I promise you. People saw my mother in the stands with a sweater that had half garnet and gold and half orange, and they said, well, she's for both teams. She was for her husband. She was for my dad because she didn't want the little boy to beat the dad. Here was Tommy turning the Clemson program around, coaching against my father, who, if he won that game, not only would he remain undefeated and have a chance to win a national championship, but he would have a chance to become one of the top 4 or 5 coaches in history to win their 300th game.
The Florida State Seminoles, the #1 team in the land, have pulled off the victory, and for Bobby Bowden, win number 300.
Bobby prevailed, his name forever etched into football immortality. Paul Bear Bryant, Glenn Pop Warner, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Joe Paterno, and finally, Bobby Bowden.
When I'm through, and if I had a legacy, is that, well, Bobby Bowden was one of the best football coaches we've ever had. That's what I like. You don't have to say the best. He's one of the best we ever had, and he didn't cheat. He did not cheat. He did it honestly, and he tried to help his young men become better people. That's all I can ask for, really.
For many, the first week of January represents the promise of a new year, a beginning. For others, it is the end, a culmination of a season worth of ecstasy and anguish. But the goal is clear. One game, one victory, one national championship. In the early 1960s, Joe Namath, Alabama's quarterback, seemed as much made for movie stardom as for football.
You know, Alabama's a real conservative state, and old farm boys back in that days with the crew cuts, and he had this kind of swarthy, handsome movie star look, and he was different, to say the least.
We got this skinny kid from Beaver Falls as our quarterback, and obvious real quick that he was going to be exceptional.
When he came to Alabama, he could run, he could jump, dunk a basketball. See, and that's unheard of really back in those times. So he was just a great athlete.
Namath had a turbulent career at Alabama. Paul Bear Bryant suspended his star quarterback for the final 2 games of his junior season.
I think he was riding down the road by the sorority row, and they rode up on the lawn of one of the sorority houses, and they had just got through sodding that lawn. That's probably where he got in trouble, and Coach Bryant kind of disciplined for that.
Back the following season as a senior starter, Namath tore up his knee in the 4th game of the season. His Alabama career appeared to be in jeopardy. Despite losing Namath, Alabama rolled to a perfect 10-0 season. The Crimson Tide accepted a bid to play Texas in the Orange Bowl on New Year's 1965. The first game ever to be played and televised at night.
NBC's decision to air the 1965 Orange Bowl game in prime time was a milestone in sports television history. It predated the Super Bowl, and in fact, there hadn't even been a nighttime World Series baseball game up to that time.
And they had a record audience and a record crowd. Fortunately, they picked maybe one of the greatest matchups in history.
You had Bear Bryant on one sideline and Darrell Royal on the other, and here they were competing in a classic, which that game truly was.
Namath's knee was so heavily taped, he was deemed immobile and unready to play.
He always prepared to play, but I don't think he really expected to play. If something happened, then he would go in and be ready to play.
Hi, everyone, and a very pleasant welcome to Miami for the playing of the 31st Orange Bowl game. The Crimson Tide of Paul Bear Bryant, the #1 college team in the land, against Coach Darrell Royal's Texas Longhorns, a team that was #1 last year and #4 this season.
Steve Sloan, who finished the season at quarterback for Alabama, started the game.
And they started the reserve quarterback, and we were blitzing him with success, handling it real well.
Texas scored twice on Alabama in the first 20 minutes of play to take a 14-0 lead.
The 30, the 20, the 10, and he's over!
Alabama was a couple of touchdowns behind and looking woeful.
Looking to throw, great protection. Has a man, cut right at the 15, the 10, the 5, into the end zone!
Hoping to rally the Tide in the second quarter, Bear took a chance on his hobbled star.
Joe Namath, the great quarterback of the University of Alabama.
Sometimes you bring in somebody else, you get a big lift. That gave the team a really big lift. Of course, you can bring somebody in with that talent. You know, that it's nice to have a backup with that type of ability.
Namath entered the game. He drove the Crimson Tide 87 yards in 14 plays for a touchdown that cut the Longhorns' lead in half.
Every time we'd blitz, he'd dump it to somebody. We'd blitz again, he'd dump it to somebody. It looked like they were going to score every damn play.
Namath put the Tide in motion. In the third quarter, he rifled a 20-yard touchdown pass to flanker Ray Perkins, cutting the Longhorns' lead to 21-14.
I think we were ready to and confident until the last bell rung that we were going to pull it out.
Down by 4 in the fourth quarter, Namath connected on a series of passes and drove his team to the 6-yard line for 1st and goal. Fullback Steve Bowman hit the Texas line 3 straight times.
Doesn't look like he made it. 4th down and a yard to go.
Joe came to the sideline to find out what play we wanted to run, and nobody had a real good answer. And then finally, he said, well, I'll just take it in.
Joe Namath is trying the quarterback sneak. Did he get it over there? No signal as yet. He's right in the goal line.
Texas had this great middle linebacker named Tommy Nobis, and he anticipated what Joe was going to do, so as Joe began to take his vault over the line, Tommy was doing the same thing.
Our Texas man says no. Our Alabama man is nodding his head yes.
He wound up in the end zone and said at the time that one of the officials called it a touchdown, but the referee, quote, overruled.
There has been no signal. It is not a touchdown. Texas has that football on a brilliant goal line stand.
Well, it's very close. You know, it could have been called either way. There's no doubt about it, and I've told people that. I personally did not think his initial surge made it across. Joe was crawling on the elbows and stuff, but we feel like we stopped him.
We claim he missed it by about like that.
Namath's brilliant comeback had fallen short. But the 21-17 Texas upset win over Alabama will long be remembered as the night that both Joe Namath and the Orange Bowl hit the big time. In 1966, for the first time, the national championship was to be awarded after the playing of the bowl games. Bryant's Crimson Tide entered the day with little chance of winning the national crown, ranked behind 3 other teams in the AP poll.
Well, few people took notice of Bear Bryant's plan to stage a national championship game between Alabama and Nebraska in the Orange Bowl. The possibilities were just so unlikely.
Bear Bryant had been in the bowl business a long time, knew the ins and outs, and I think he had a great deal of say about who was going to play where and when.
Bear had convinced 3rd-ranked Nebraska to accept the Orange Bowl bid to face his Crimson Tide. Bryant believed the 2 top teams in the nation, Michigan State and Arkansas, were beatable. In the unlikely event that they were both upset in their earlier games, the Orange Bowl would determine the national championship.
He wanted to play the top team that he could play in the bowl game. I always wanted to play the team that gave his team the best chance to be national champions.
New Year's Day 1966 might have been Bear Bryant's most dazzling display of bowl jockeying.
First up, the Cotton Bowl in Dallas. 2nd-ranked Arkansas against unranked LSU. The first surprise of the day. The Razorbacks were stunned 14-7. One piece of Bear's puzzle was in place.
So that means Nebraska moves up to number 2, and Alabama moves up to number 3, and then you had the Rose Bowl.
Number 1 Michigan State needed to win for a national championship. Only underdog UCLA stood in the way.
I mean, it was David and Goliath. That's how much better this team was than us. I mean, they thought they were going to clean our clock. I agreed with them. I did.
Meanwhile, back in Miami, hours before his kickoff, Bryant was preparing his squad for a Michigan State upset.
We got class, we're going to find it out. We've got class, and I know we got it. And what we got to do, first place, our defense has got to go out there and take the ball.
I remember Coach Bryant saying something to the effect, hey, we're going to be in good position. We'll just play it out today. You know, let's see what happens.
What happened was improbable. UCLA scored 2 second-quarter touchdowns and held on for a shocking 14-12 victory. It was one of the biggest upsets in Rose Bowl history. Number 1 had fallen.
And all at once, Nebraska and Alabama are playing for the national title.
I went over to Bryant. He was typical Bryant with his hat down over his eyes, leaning against the goalpost. And he kind of gestured, and I went over and he put his arm around me and he said, he's looking out at Nebraska, he says, big, good-looking boys, my goodness, look how big they are and how fast. He says, we're going to beat the hell out of them.
As if by magic, Brian got the help he needed earlier in the day. Now at night, he had control. But the magician had one more trick.
And he just got me off to the side and he said that he wasn't going to tell anybody. He said he wasn't going to tell the coaches, he wasn't going to tell the players. He was just telling me that I could forget the structure that we normally call plays by. I could throw the ball anytime I wanted to, anywhere on the field.
With a secret offensive plan in place, Bryant wasted no time in dazzling the Cornhuskers with the unusual.
We started the game with a tackle-eligible screen. Very unusual play. You can't run that play now in college football.
Coach Bryant even told somebody, we can't win this game 3-0 or 10-6 and hope to come out of it with a national championship. We're going to have to be impressive.
Bryant unleashed a furious first-half passing attack that had Nebraska bewildered. Sloan shattered Orange Bowl passing records as he connected with flanker Ray Perkins, who caught 2 touchdown passes. Alabama blitzed Nebraska for a 24-7 halftime lead.
I think we came out and just showed them a game plan that we had not shown all year, or ever for that matter. You know, throwing the ball 35 times, that's not Alabama.
By the end of the night, Alabama had racked up 518 yards of total offense against a stunned and ill-prepared Nebraska team. The unexpected offensive fireworks gave Alabama a 39-28 win. The national championship was theirs.
I don't think everybody expected us to win the ball game, but we knew down deep that we were going to go out and win that football game.
Typical of Bryant, going to a bowl eventually would lead to something better for him. And the '66 Orange Bowl led to another national championship.
After taking over from Bob Devaney in 1973, Tom Osborne coached Nebraska to a number of outstanding seasons. But he was unable to lift the Cornhuskers back to the national title.
Coach Devaney came to Nebraska, made him a national par, won national titles in '70 and '71, took him to big bowl games every year, and Tom Osborne comes in, could not win the big ones.
What has happened to the Huskers after their winning seasons? In bowl games, they have lost and lost embarrassingly.
In 1983, after 2 consecutive seasons that ended in near misses at the national championship, Tom Osborne assembled an offensive juggernaut. Quarterback Turner Gill, running back Mike Rozier, and wide receiver Irving Fry.
They were exceptional. Basically, we wrote the NCAA record book with what they accomplished, and of course, all 3 of them legitimate Heisman candidates.
They were so dominant. They were the Muhammad Ali. They were the early Mike Tyson of college football at that time. They hadn't lost a game in almost 2 years, and nobody thought Nebraska was going to get beaten. Nobody.
The top-ranked Huskers would have a chance to prove their dominance in the Orange Bowl on New Year's Day, 1984. And Osborne would have a chance to attain the national championship trophy that had eluded him for over a decade. Standing in his way, Bernie Kosar and the hometown Miami Hurricanes.
That was a tough one as a fan. You know, if you sat back and said, God, we should play these guys anywhere else than playing them in their home place for the national championship.
I asked each one of them not to think about the fact that they were undefeated, not to think about the Outland Trophy winner, don't worry about the Heisman Trophy winner, but to study their men individually. We would find that they're human and that may not be as good as all their press clippings have made them out to be.
We knew there were going to be some things that they could do to maybe slow us down, but we always went in the ball game thinking that we're going to score 35 to 40 points a game. And there was no way that we would ever thought in our mind that we would lose a football game.
Schellenberger and his Miami Hurricanes ready to take on one of the great teams in college football history, the Nebraska Cornhuskers.
From the beginning, it appeared that the home field advantage was overwhelming.
Hits back, Rozier. Tremendous play.
Backs are split behind Kosar. Second and short, like a free play down the middle. Dennison, he scores! Touchdown pass, Glenn Dennison! With 1:08 left to play in the first quarter. Would you believe it? It is 16-0 Miami.
Early in the game, we got behind 17-0. And throughout the game, we just kind of clawed our way back, you know, and began to gain a little momentum.
On a trick play called the Fumble-Ruski, 270-pound guard Dean Steinkühler picked up an intentional fumble by Turner Gill and rumbled 19 yards for a touchdown.
Huskers fired up by the Fumble-Ruski.
But in the third quarter, Kosar's aerial precision led Miami to a 31-17 lead.
Touchdown, Miami!
Nebraska battled back to 31-24, and the Huskers had one last chance with less than 2 minutes left.
Fourth down is coming up for Nebraska. Well, they've won 22 straight games, 12-0 this season, ranked number 1 all year, but they're down by 7. Look at this play, Jeff Smith. Touchdown, Nebraska!
It was 31-30.
And what does Nebraska do?
Tom Osborne faced a career-defining decision. A tie assured him a national championship.
I have not seen the kicker come on the field, and I don't think he's coming on the field.
I always assumed that if a coach settled for a tie, they wouldn't make him the national champion, and our players, we'd had a great offensive team, and I knew they wouldn't be happy with settling for the tie.
There was no hesitation in Coach Osborne, a signal giving 2 points, called the play, got my players there, looked them in the eyes and say, hey, keep believing, we will get it done.
This is for the national championship for Nebraska. Incomplete.
They had a defensive back who came off of Irving Fryer, made a great reaction, and just got a fingertip on the ball, and that was it. And they won the game and the national championship, and we go home to Lincoln without it.
I know I don't regret him making that decision. I'd have been the other way around if he'd have, given the 1 point as far as the finger that's saying that let's go for one. I'd have been dejected inside. I probably wouldn't have shown it outside per se, but I've been disappointed that we didn't go out and be 13-0. That was our goal, was 13-0 from the beginning of the season. He knew that, and so I'm glad he did give us an opportunity to go for 2.
You wanted to see him go for it because as a fan, you want to see one play. You want to see one play that wins or loses the game, and in this case, the national championship.
I cared about what the fans thought, and I would have liked to have had a national championship. But ultimately, I think it would have been a disappointment to the players, and it would have been a disappointment to me personally. So I really felt it was the thing we had to do, and probably would do it over again if I had to.
Notre Dame coach Ara Parseghian won the national championship in 1966, despite tying Michigan State. He decided to run out the clock late in the game rather than taking chances to win.
And it looks like that's all. Michigan State 10, Notre Dame 10.
Parsegian received considerable criticism from fans and the media, who felt the championship was tainted.
To this day, Era probably regrets doing what he did. Other teams can run the clock out. Notre Dame's not supposed to. Notre Dame is not supposed to run out the clock.
Era Parsegian brought his inexperienced but hungry third-ranked Irish to the Sugar Bowl in 1973. His opponent, Bear Bryant and top-ranked Alabama. The championship was at stake, and the game had all the markings of a fiery brawl.
It was the first time that Notre Dame and Alabama had played. It was the first time that Bear Bryant and I had coached against one another. It was the North against the South, the Baptist against the Catholics. I mean, highly, potentially explosive.
We knew going in that if we won the game, we would be national champions. So it was a huge game for us to get motivated for, and it's scary to be under that much pressure as a 20, 21-year-old kid.
This is the dream match, the most important game of the year.
Notre Dame and Alabama. At Notre Dame, football is a religion. At Alabama, it's a way of life.
But Mother Nature had her own plans for the Sugar Bowl.
It had rained all day long, and it was cold rain.
In our pregame warm-up, with my punter, Brian Doherty, had come to me and he says, Coach, he said, this end zone slopes down to get the water to run off. So a punter was faced with almost an uphill lie, and that influenced me.
He didn't know it then, but Brian Doherty had made a discovery that would change Notre Dame history.
Best football game I've ever seen. Absolutely. Because there was some doubt about who was going to win the ball game from the very opening, and because Bear Bryant and Era Parsegian matched wits.
The first time these two teams have met on the football field.
Inside handoff, touchdown Alabama.
They scored a touchdown, but then we came right back with a kickoff return. And from that point on, it just went down to the wire.
People are watching some football game here. We've said this many times during the course of the contest.
The game turned into a wide-open affair, with the lead changing hands 6 times.
Well conceived play and touchdown.
With less than 3 minutes remaining in the game and grasping to a 24-23 lead, the Irish were pinned against their own goal line.
Notre Dame ran a couple of plays, and I told Era one time that you were running almost like the Michigan State game.
If Notre Dame could make the first down, Bama would not see the ball again.
Facing a 3rd down and 8, Parsegian recalled Doherty's pregame discovery that the end zone was treacherous.
Notre Dame was going into the wind and would have a hard time getting the ball out of there. Era's outlining all the possibilities.
We were backed up in our own end zone where any bad thing that happened could have resulted in a safety.
And all we needed was a field goal. So the odds were with us that we could do that because we had moved it all game long.
We took out one of the split end, put in 2 tight ends, all the backfield in the back, making it look like we're going to run.
Well, this is it for Notre Dame.
3rd down. Clements coming out is a pass, and he's got his man. Robin Weber, number 91, a sophomore from Dallas, Texas.
Give Tommy Clements all the credit in the world. We said at the very top of the show, he was a young man who was not afraid.
You know, Era made the call, and I'm sure surprised a lot of people. We certainly surprised the Alabama defense.
They drop back, throw a pass, the tight end comes right in front of Alabama's bench. I could have reached out and tripped him. Well, this is the first time they had ever did that kind of a thing. It was a tremendous surprise.
Weber juggles the ball. He hasn't caught one pass the whole season. The ball's bouncing up and down. When I'm watching this, my heart came out. I said, my God, he almost dropped the ball.
Finally, Era Parsegian had brought the national championship trophy back to South Bend. It was the school's first since it returned to bowl play in 1970. It was also Era's first title since 1966.
People say the 66 was a little bit tainted because they ran out the clock. I think in the back of his mind that when he called that play, he was going to erase that memory, and in some ways he did.
You've got to go out and win the ball game, and I respect him for doing that. It was a gutsy play, but it worked for him.
For the critics and fans alike, Parseghian's bold decision had been viewed as vindication. But for the Notre Dame coach, it was nothing more than the right call at the right time.
You never know how things are going to work out. It turned out that they bought the package. 2 tight ends were going to run it conservatively down there. That was a huge play.
I can't tell you how thrilled we are to be able to participate in the Sugar Bowl Classic and to be able to win the championship. We're thrilled. It was a great game for college football.
Four times from the 60s to the 90s, Penn State's Joe Paterno fielded unbeaten football teams that were not voted national champions. His teams were battling on the field and fighting for respect off of it.
I think being an Eastern Independent was tough. You know, we really didn't, particularly in the late 60s, there was not that kind of respect for Eastern football.
But now Blackledge is going to put it up on first down. He's going for the bundle. Garrity! Touchdown!
In 1983, Paterno's quest for the elusive first national championship was realized as he led the Lions to a Sugar Bowl win over Georgia. His team was near the top 4 years later. Penn State was matched up against the talent-laden Miami Hurricanes in the Fiesta Bowl. Paterno knew that for Penn State to gain respect, he would have to show that his workhorse team could beat Miami.
There was a perception that our football was somewhat inferior when we had to go play Miami, what Miami would do to us because we were playing in the East. It really bothered him. I think to go and do everything that you could do and do things the right way, I think it really bothered him.
Though the two were neighbors in the polls, the teams could not have been further apart in styles. A reflection of their coach, the Nittany Lions were understated. The Hurricanes were brash and arrogant. That image was immediately underscored when Miami stepped off the plane in Arizona clad in battle fatigues.
I think that Miami came in there with an idea that they could intimidate us.
Well, I don't know what they were trying to tell us. I mean, the fact is, for them to be in the Army, I mean, those guys in the Army, they would never fly. They're saying that they're going to war and that, I mean, it was a bunch of nonsense.
The Miami practice facility had been known as the Outlaws Training Camp.
And Miami team, those are all the guys that they just didn't have enough room for in the jail, so they let them go to Miami to play football.
We had a cocky group, and I think because of the players that we had recruited, a lot of them were street kids. We had a lot of success, we won a lot of games, and so our guys had that kind of a feeling that we're going to go ahead and dominate the game.
We thought they were a bunch of jerks. I mean, no one really said anything to the press about it, but we just felt like they were trying to show us up in some way, and we didn't like that.
Despite their outlandish behavior, Miami was a dominating team.
It was probably one of the best college football teams of all time. Testaverde was coming off a Heisman Trophy, and they had great wideouts, Michael Irving and those guys. And I think that maybe they were out to prove that maybe they were the best. And they weren't in the game to beat us, they were in the game to win big.
The moment is at hand. The national championship rests in the balance.
Well, our game plan was that we were going to throw as many different things at Testaverde as we could. We had 150 different looks. During a normal game, you would have anywhere from 25 to 50.
Opening moments of the second quarter. Testaverde, all the time in the world. And goes deep to Brand. It's intercepted. As time slips a bit, throws. It's intercepted by Cobb. Testaverde to throw. It is intercepted by Gitopoulos.
All we needed was for the offense not to either turn the ball over or to get us a small lead. They got us a small lead, and we'd be able to hold it.
After taking a 3-point fourth-quarter lead, Testaverde was intercepted for the 4th time in the game.
Intercepted. Conlon to the 5.
2 plays later, with just 3:34 left in the game, tailback DJ Dozier ran it in from the 6 to give Penn State a 14-10 lead. But the cocky bunch from Miami was not done. Deep in their territory, the Hurricanes faced a 4th and 6 with 2:24 left.
You go for it here, Charlie. The whole game is on the line right here. If you miss it, it's over.
Here it is for the title. It's there, first down to Brian Blades. Blades down the sideline, all the way to the Penn State 41-yard line.
When they made that play, I thought we were in trouble. And we were tired. We had been on the field defensively a long time. And I didn't know whether I doubted us at that point in time.
Testaverde, Irvin at the 10.
Testaverde completed his next 5 passes. The battle was Miami's to win. It looked like another good effort, but another tough loss for Joe Paterno.
When they got down near the goal line, there was a timeout. Trey Bauer, the inside linebacker, came over to the sideline and he walked up to me and I looked at him and I said, "It's rough out there, isn't it?" I said, "Good luck." And this was it. I mean, this was everything that those young men had to live for.
4th down, national championship. Intercepted, Giftopoulos.
We won a game really we had no business winning, talent-wise. That was a very rewarding thing, and to understand that, hey, it's not always the guy that has the most talent that wins these things.
The Penn State Nittany Lions are the national champions.
In dramatic fashion, Joe Paterno had won his 2nd national championship. He had overcome decades of bowl game controversies and near-miss national championships.
It was a very, very significant win for us, but I really feel as if it all started with a miscalculation as to how good we were.
In 1901, a Pasadena, California civic group agreed to stage an East-West football game as part of its regular New Year's Day festivities. It took place without most of the nation even knowing about it.
Well, there was a tournament of roses in Pasadena, and it was more or less to show off flowers and floats and things like that. And they decided, why don't we schedule a football game? So the most powerful team in the country then was Michigan, coached by Fielding H. Yost. He was known as Hurry Up Yost, and his team was called the Point-A-Minute Wolverines because they averaged a point a minute.
The opposition for mighty Michigan was Stanford University, who had the most established football program on the West Coast. The Pacific game lagged behind other regions, and Stanford's victory prospects against the Easterners were dismal at best.
Coming into the game, Stanford fans felt it would be a moral victory if they scored even a point. After all, Yost's Michigan team outscored their opponents 501-0 in the regular season.
In the middle of the 3rd quarter, it's 49-0, and Stanford is strictly outmatched. I mean, there's nothing they can do to stem the tide of the point-a-minute Wolverines. So the Stanford captain went up to the Michigan captain and said, "If you don't mind, sir, we've had enough." And the first Rose Bowl ended in the 3rd quarter.
The following year, tournament officials decided to go back to polo matches and Roman chariot races as their main source of entertainment. The Tournament of Roses waited for the West to catch up to the East in the game of football. On the 20th anniversary of the inaugural Rose Bowl game blowout, tiny Washington and Jefferson College in Pennsylvania would be called upon to attempt the unthinkable, to beat California.
California was so good, nobody wanted to go out and play them.
California was a powerhouse. Beating Ohio State in the Rose Bowl previously, something like 28-0, destroyed them.
The contest was supposed to be another chance to showcase how far West Coast football had evolved.
Washington and Jefferson was held in such contempt by the West Coast press that they were calling them things like Willie and Joe or Willie and Jake.
They said it was like bringing the lamb to the slaughter. They said, all we really know about Washington and Jefferson, they're both dead.
With a limited budget and little hope, the Washington and Jefferson presidents traveled from Pennsylvania with only the minimum number of players to Pasadena.
We only had 11 guys play that game. That's a record that will never be touched.
Those 11 players shocked the heavily favored California team, holding them to just 2 first downs and 49 yards in total offense. The game ended in a scoreless tie.
It epitomized college football that 11 guys could rise to this occasion and overcome it, arguably the best team in the country.
After a stunning result in 1922, the Rose Bowl's prominence increased. But the contest 3 years later transformed the Rose Bowl from a novelty to a major American sporting event. On New Year's Day, 1925, Notre Dame was set to make the journey to Pasadena to take on Stanford University.
The circumstances were just classic. 2 of the greatest coaches of all time, Knute Rockne at Notre Dame, Pop Warner at Stanford. On the field, Ernie Nevers, the great All-American, who had a wonderful career at Stanford, versus the 4 horsemen of Notre Dame. The situation just couldn't have been better.
The Rose Bowl at that time sat just a little over 60,000 seats. According to reports of that day, they could have sold well over 100,000 tickets. Every important newspaper writer from the East Coast and Midwest had descended upon that game out there.
Stanford would come into the game with one huge disadvantage. Ernie Nevers had broken both of his ankles over the course of the regular season, and the cast had been removed just 10 days before the game.
Pop Warner rigs up a rather unique brace for him to be able to play using metal in his shoe and then bicycle tires strapped to his leg. He ends up carries the ball 34 times for 114 yards.
Ernie Nevers was unbelievable. I mean, Stanford outplayed him, but Notre Dame found a way to win.
In front of a sellout crowd and a national press, Notre Dame would upset the local favorite 27-10.
People truly began to talk about bowl games after that 1925 Rose Bowl. The press coverage was unprecedented, and the game actually lived up to all the hype.
Rockne and his Notre Dame team had won their first national championship, and the football game at the Tournament of Roses firmly established itself as one of America's premier sporting events. In September 1979, the University of Southern California was defending national champions and launched a promising season in Lubbock, Texas against Texas Tech. The Trojans were loaded and featured a backfield populated by 2 future Heisman Trophy winners.
We had some special players. And Marcus Allen at fullback, he was blocking for Charles White on student body right, student body left. You look at the offensive line that we had, phenomenal.
That group featured 4 All-Americans. But it was Anthony Munoz who excited NFL scouts. 3 plays into the opening game, Munoz's season forever changed.
I laid there on the turf, and I'm, it's like, here's my senior year, my last hurrah, and it's, not even a quarter into the game, and I'm laying there on the turf in Lubbock, Texas, and sure enough, I had to go through my 3rd knee operation in 4 years.
Despite the absence of Munoz on the offensive line, USC went through the season unbeaten and was ranked 3rd in the country going into their Rose Bowl matchup with top-ranked Ohio State.
I decided to go to USC to battle for a national championship, which we had won, to play, UCLA, Notre Dame, and to play in the Rose Bowl. This was my senior year. We had played in 2 Rose Bowls prior to that. I hadn't played because of knee operations. I'm going to do whatever I can to play in that game January 1st.
In December, Munoz was on the mend. Now the Trojans had a decision to make.
And he came into my office and said, should I play and then go into the NFL because he would have used his last year of eligibility, or should I stay and come back next year?
I didn't know what was going to happen on the next level because that was my third knee operation.
He was not going to play, but somehow just willed himself in the rehab and came back.
Pasadena, California, the famed granddaddy, the landmark here in Pasadena.
With 106,000 jammed into the Rose Bowl, Munoz took the field with his USC teammates.
It's almost like a dream. They announced my number, and it hadn't been announced since that first week in September.
Although sidelined all year, keep an eye out for number 77. He starts today.
Coach Robinson allowed me to go out for the coin toss with the captains. I was so high because I was able to play in that game. It's almost like it was blank.
The Ohio State Buckeyes, unbeaten, untied, against the undefeated, once-tied USC Trojans.
USC jumped out to a 10-point lead in the second quarter.
Good protection, and going long for Kevin Williams. Touchdown!
Ohio State, led by flashy sophomore quarterback Art Schleister, battled back.
Schleister going long. Williams open, 25-20, 15-10, touchdown! Oh, my!
With the Buckeyes leading 16-10 in the fourth quarter, the Trojans would have one last chance. With just over 5 minutes remaining, the Trojans were 83 yards away.
Our two teams have done an incredible job of living up to everything that was expected of them, and it all comes down to this.
I can remember making the statement, we are going to take the ball and give it to Charlie White behind Anthony Munoz.
The ball at the 17-yard line. McDonald hands to White. Nice hole. Spins away from a tackler. He's up across the 35, 40, 45, down near midfield.
You couldn't have asked for a better script to the finale of this game.
We really decided to, what we did best was run the ball, and that was giving it to Charlie.
First down at the 49 of USC. It's White again. 45, 40, 35, 30. He's all the way to the 22. Charles White is over the 200-yard mark today.
In the last 4 minutes, we ran the ball, Charlie White behind Anthony Munoz, just play after play. And Charlie White had a broken nose and there was blood coming down. I mean, it was very dramatic.
Charles White plows inside the 5 to the 4 and maybe the 3.
It was so businesslike. I mean, the training we had, the whole mentality was just like, hey, come on, we got to do it again. Let's get in the huddle, and not a whole lot had to be said.
Trojans started this drive on their own 17-yard line. They're down to the Buckeye 3. Third down, Allen the outback. White the tailback in the I formation. The snap, pitch to White, starts right. He's at the 5. He's hit, spins close. He's down at the 1.
The game had come down to one final play and one more push for the duo of White and Munoz.
We drove the ball down the field and made plays when we had to, and then got down near the goal line, and it was textbook SC.
A touchdown to tie, an extra point would give SC the lead. 1:38 left. Clock is running. White, touchdown!
Despite his aching knee, Munoz cleared the way for Charles White on that last drive. White gained 71 of USC's 83 yards on that workmanlike march.
The excitement and the celebration that I had was probably even more than what a lot of the guys had, because all these guys had played in 2 other ones. And this was my first one, the first experience I had of being an active member of the team and winning a Rose Bowl.